Welcome to the good Lord. It is the 23rd annual Kenneth Owler Smith Symposium. It's such a pleasure to be here and think about it. How many other events have been going on for this long? When we think about the public relations communications profession here in Los Angeles, and we're still a fairly young kind of profession, what has been happening for 23 years? For how many years have the Prism Awards been going on? Stephen, anybody know? Where's Stephen? So the Prism Awards have been going on for? 49. Okay, so it's that and the Ken Smith Symposium. Those are like the two backbone events of our ever-expanding public relations and communications community here. And with that, I'd like to introduce Stefan Roth, who's going to come up and say a few words on behalf of our partners, PRSA LA. Come on up, Stefan.
Jerry.
Pleasure.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Well, on behalf of the Los Angeles chapter of PRSA, I'd like to welcome you all as well. We at PRSA LA are always thrilled to partner with Jerry and his team on this event. They always pull out the stops and bring out amazing topics and presentations and speakers, and tonight is definitely no exception to that, so we're excited. And of course, Jerry's going to tell us a little bit more of what we can expect here in a minute. I hope. But I'd like to tell you just a little bit what we have going on at PRSA LA right now. In 2013, we've really made a big push to kind of diversify our programming across the various industries and topics that we're addressing in our materials, the venues and locales for our events, and just really trying to reach a broader array of the PR community here in LA. We've already had 3 really great events. We've got another one coming up on April 24th. It's our diversity event. It's called Engaging Multicultural Consumers, Is Your Brand Doing It Right? That's going to take place actually at the community auditorium of the LAPD headquarters downtown, and promises to be a great event. We've got executives from AT&T, from Ford Motor Company, Lifetime, LAPD, so it's going to be a really good panel. Also, just after that, on May 8th, we have our annual Connections Networking event. This is a free event, and it's we hold simultaneous events all over greater LA, so it's a great way to come mingle and network, and no cost to that. And then finally, something I just wanted to point out that I think might be relevant for some of you in the audience, if anyone's a PRSA member, if you are about to graduate, there's a very special opportunity that you can become a PRSA associate member. You can step up to that for just $85 as long as you're a PRSA member by the time you graduate, and that covers your membership for a whole year. It's normally probably around $400 for the combined membership, so it's a really good value, and I want to encourage you to do that. We have all information on everything I mentioned on our website, prsala.org. So check it out and come check us out at one of our events. Thanks.
The way tonight's program is going to be structured is that Larry Grisolano and Andrew Bleeker, our 2 outstanding speakers, will each present comments that will go on for about, about 3 or 4 hours. You have 400 slides apiece, I think is what I heard. They'll speak for about 15 or 20 minutes each. Our Dean, Dean Ernest Wilson, is going to moderate a discussion after their presentations. And Dan Schnurr, who runs USC's Unruh Institute for Politics and is well known to many of you, will also be part of that Q&A that will follow the 2 individual presentations. Let me tell you a little bit about the folks who are going to be participating and speaking, and I'll first have the honor of introducing our Dean, Ernest W. Wilson III. Ernie, would you just stand up for a moment and be seen? Well, let's see. Ernest James Wilson III, Ph.D., is Walter Annenberg Chair in Communication and Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California. He's also a professor of political science, a faculty fellow at the USA Center on Public Diplomacy here at the Annenberg School, a member of the board of the Pacific Council on International Policy and the National Academy's Computer Science and Telecommunications Board, and he's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank God I got through that part paragraph. Dean Wilson's experience at the intersection of communication and public policy spans the private and public sectors. He has served as a consultant to international agencies such as the World Bank and the United Nations, worked in government at the White House National Security Council, and led research centers and academic departments at premier institutions of higher education. Nominated by President Clinton in 2000, Dean Wilson served on the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting from 2000 to 2010, and the last year as chairman. So let's hear it for Dean Ernest W. Wilson. Now, let's see, a few words about Larry Grisolano. It's impossible to sum up this history in a few words. In 30 years as a political professional, Larry, why don't you stand up for a sec, just so folks can see you? In 30 years as a political professional, Larry has been at the center of some of the most important battles for the Democratic Party and for progressive ideas in California and nationally. From January of 2007 to November of 2008, Larry served as Director of Paid Media and Opinion Research for Obama for America and Obama-Biden 2008. In this role, he created, supervised, and directed a sophisticated opinion research program that provided the strategic roadmap for the campaign, which is named Marketer of the Year by Ad Age magazine. No small feat. In 2011, Larry was asked back to serve as Director of Paid Media for the Obama-Biden re-election campaign, responsible for message development, managed message delivery, creative development, and strategic placement of the campaign's $400 million paid media campaign. Helped innovate a highly effective system of mass media targeting and media integration, maximizing delivery of TV, internet, and direct mail messages to target voters. Larry also has a really impressive history right here in California. Let's see, he's been heavily involved in some of the state's most highly charged ballot measures. He was the lead consultant in the California labor community's successful fight against Prop 75, the most fiercely contested measure on Governor Schwarzenegger's 2005 special election ballot. He also managed Prop 72, Save Our Healthcare, in 2004, which would have created a pay-for-play employer health system in California, and so on. The measure failed by just 200,000 votes out of 12 million cast. So a close call, but a winner nonetheless. Larry, it's great to have you here. Andrew Bleeker, Larry's colleague. Arguably, there is no one with more experience in political online marketing than Andrew Bleeker. This is a young field, and yet Andrew is emerged as one of the top people, one of the most noted people in it. He most recently served as new media director for the Presidential Inaugural Committee. During the 2008 general election, he was director of internet advertising for Obama for America, where he oversaw the largest political online marketing operation in history. In this capacity, he was responsible for all aspects of online marketing for the campaign and the Democratic National Committee, including unprecedented programs for list building, donor acquisition, voter registration, early voting, messaging, and GeoTV. Also responsible for search engine optimization. Prior to joining the Obama campaign, Andrew held a similar position at Hillary Clinton for president, where his online advertising campaign produced unprecedented returns on investment. Great to have you here, Andrew. And last but by no means least, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dan Schnurr, longtime colleague and friend. Joining us for the panel discussion. Dan, you're going to stand up. And note, please, notice too, of course, that Dan and I have something in common this evening. We are the only two people in the entire room wearing neckties. No, there's another necktie over there, right? Another one over there. Good Lord, they're everywhere. Far too many neckties. So joining us tonight for the panel is Dan Schnurr, to whom we owe a debt, by the way, a debt of gratitude for helping us pull together tonight's program. Dan serves as director of USC's Jesse M. Unruh Institute of Politics, where he works to motivate students to become active in the world of politics. He also directs the very high-profile USC Dornsife LA Times poll on California politics. I'm sure you all see that all the time on the front page of the Times. It was basically Dan's baby, his brainchild, and it is as successful as it is because of Dan. For years, Dan was one of California's leading political and media strategists with a record that includes work on 4 presidential and 3 gubernatorial campaigns. He served as the National Director of Communications for the 2000 presidential campaign of U.S. Senator John McCain and spent 5 years as chief media spokesman for California Governor Pete Wilson. In 2010, he was appointed as chairman for the California Fair Political Practices Commission, a position he held through this year's elections and until spring of 2011. And Dan has advised a lot of private sector organizations, some top-rated, very well-known NGOs, the Gates Foundation, and many others, too. So, Dan, it's great to have you here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dean Wilson, who's going to offer a few comments, and then we'll get into the presentations. Dean?
Okay, thank you, Jerry. It's a real pleasure to be back to this wonderful forum. True to the academic professorial tradition, I have an hour and 45 minutes worth of lecture. That's actually a joke, folks. I mean, don't be worried. Terror. Jerry would kill me if I talked for more than 10. But I think this is the 4th or 5th time I've done that, and it's wonderful every year. And I really want to give a round of applause to all the people who put in the hard work to make this happen with our local associations, with Jerry and his colleagues. So can I just give a shout out to the folks who made it happen. And I want to welcome all of you here. I especially want to thank Jerry because he has done a tremendous job with the Strategic Public Relations Program. He's turned it from a great program into an even greater program. Jerry and his colleagues, some of whom are here in the audience, produce every other year the GAP study, a generally accepted practices. And so it's basically an analysis of all of the main practices of leading public relations firms. And this year, for the first time, as I understand it, all 4 of the leading professional organizations have put money into this study to make sure that it is the very best in the world. And that's a real accomplishment. I know because I've tried to raise money from these public relations firms, and they don't always fork over as readily as some of us would like. But I do want to just say a few quick words about the program. It is one of the leading programs in the country at this point. We are now establishing relationships in China, in Europe, in other parts of the United States, where our main objective is to reach out to public relations professionals and ask them 2 questions. When you're hiring people, what are you looking for? And when you promote them, what are you looking for? What kind of skills and competencies? Because then Jerry and I and Geneva Overholtzer and other faculty come back to the Annenberg School, and guess what we do? We rewrite the curriculum. We rewrite the curriculum. We refocus our research efforts. We change the way that we engage as counselors and advisors to corporations, to governments, to agencies. And we think that this dialogue between practitioners and scholars is something that is absolutely essential if the public relations field is to remain viable, and frankly, more selfishly, if public relations schools and programs are to remain viable. So I think we have what I call the Annenberg advantage, which is we partner with folks beyond the school, and then within the school, we work with, because under one roof we have public relations, we have journalism, we have communications, we have public diplomacy. We're also working with the engineering school and the business school. So the Annenberg advantage is great networks and communication within the school and great networks and communication with our professional partners. One of those things that we hear executives telling us is that they want to hire people who have a facility for big data and who can recognize patterns. Pattern recognition, connecting the dots, whatever you want to call it. This is something that we're beginning to teach, and teach aggressively at the Annenberg School. And I think what is wonderful about tonight is that we have two experts who can not only talk about the commercial aspect of that, but as importantly and more importantly for tonight's discussion is how does that affect politics? How does that affect the ability to get elected, to shape public policy? And one of the things I look forward to this evening, and Larry and Andy and I were talking about this a little bit before, is that we understand that when you get big data, you have to analyze it. You have to recognize the patterns on the output side. But what these two gentlemen were saying before we came downstairs is, remember that old GIGO? You know what GIGO is? Garbage in, garbage out. And so what they were reminding us is that unless you have an understanding of the kinds of data, information, questions that you want to pose at the front end, then you won't be able to assemble the data and information that you need to be able to effectively interpret it on the back end. And so what I'm really looking forward to this evening is a discussion about this whole issue. Where does the information come from, and how do you define it? How do you massage it and analyze it effectively? And then when it pops out at the other end of the computer, how do you interpret that? And why is this important? Because if you can figure this out, guess what you can do? You can get elected to be President of the United States of America. And I think, and certainly in my travels, and I'm sure this is true of my colleagues, when I go to China, when I go to Europe, other parts of the world, people are very curious about what President Obama's campaign did in the last election. How do you target particular groups? How do you get, which information is valuable? How do you use that information to get them out to the polls? So I very much, again, welcome all of you here this evening. I think it's going to be a very robust and exciting conversation, as Jerry said, from two of the most distinguished and effective experts in this area. I'm delighted that my colleague Dan Schur is going to be here also, who is, we share a lot of panels. I found out and it's also good because I have to confess I'm a Democrat. So I'm just putting everything on the table here in the spirit of transparency. Dan is at least an independent, if not more. And so I do think we'll have a free and fair and open and balanced discussion. And with that, I would like to invite Larry to come up and talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll continue from there. Larry, the podium is yours. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Dean and Jerry, for the nice introduction. Good to see my friend Dan Schnur again. And thank you to everybody who's here to listen to what we have to say today. I appreciate your interest in the topic, and so I hope we can have an interesting dialogue. One quick thing to just frame things up for my portion of the conversation. I want to kind of put my own biases, not my political biases, because that's obvious, but my perspective on the data conversation in context. I was the guy in charge of the advertising campaign. So I didn't create the data. We had an incredibly smart team of people who would create all kinds of insights for us. And I was on the consumer side. So when we had a data group that would mine and process and cull through data, and I was a consumer of their good work. So for those of you who were hoping to hear about algorithms, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I can tell you a little bit about what we did with their output. So the first thing that I wanted to share as sort of a setup is, and I think this is missed in a lot of the conversation about the data in the Obama campaign, you have to start with a strategy. And the data and all of the information that we got culling through voter information didn't determine strategy. We started with a strategy, and the data helped us execute that strategy more efficiently. And to be more concrete, the setup, what we faced in this campaign was we had a president who was seeking re-election, and very much people's attitudes, their vote, was very much wrapped up in their view of him. Most of the people who voted for Obama decided very early on that they were for Obama, and most of the people who voted against him decided very early on that they were going to be against him. And so in that environment, the big driving issue, the one thing that made the biggest difference from those people who were in the middle, who sort of saw him as the central actor in the campaign but hadn't yet made up their mind, the biggest issue was the economy. And what you saw in this campaign was sort of a battle for definition of what that economic vote meant. The Romney campaign's idea of what that economic vote should mean was that the president had been in charge for the previous 3 years. The economy was not going well. People were upset with that. And therefore, it's time to try somebody new. And this was a pretty convincing argument to a lot of people. Indeed, a lot of voters were feeling the pain of a grinding recession, and it was hard to convince people to continue to be patient and that actually we were making progress. And we tried a bunch of different ways to kind of counter this idea. And ultimately, the way we countered it, and the definition that we tried to impose on the election was, yes, indeed, this is an economic election, but it's not about the recession of the last 4 years. It's about the decline of the middle class for the past 30. It's about the fact that there's been trends and forces going on in the economy that came long before this recession. And in fact, what we discovered about this was people cared a lot more about that long-term decline in the middle class than they cared about the pace of the recovery. And so we tried to impose our definition on what an economic vote meant. The other side tried to impose their definition. And the tools of the data were largely to try and execute on this strategy that was sort of the economic message. There was one other thing that was kind of at the strategic core of the campaign, which was this message about the middle class was a very unifying message. It got us the kind of broadest possible vote share that was available to the president. But there were a few other things that we felt could drive up our vote share above and beyond that. And they were largely gifts that were given to us during the Republican nominating process. Governor Romney said some things about women and choice, about immigration and Latinos that we felt that if we deployed properly, we could push up our vote share with those groups. So in that kind of that sort of two pieces of things resided the strategy that we felt could get us the winning vote share, and the data was really there to deliver on that strategy. The other thing that I think we stumbled upon a lot of innovations and a lot of kind of new ways of doing things. And we didn't do, this wasn't like Bell Labs where people were sort of put out there to see if they could kind of find new things with technology. We were very focused, and this is kind of an example of necessity is the mother of invention. The reason why we found things was because we thought if we didn't do things smarter that we were going to lose. And in particular, we were very concerned throughout the campaign about the influence of these outside groups that were kind of unleashed by the Citizens United Supreme Court decision that allowed outside groups to spend unlimited in political campaigns. And particularly in my world, in the advertising world, we expected to see $1 billion spent against and attacking President Obama from the various sources coming from the other side, and that projection turned out to be pretty close to right. So we figured, what are we going to do? Because we had a lot of money, but we didn't have anywhere near that much money. And so ultimately what we decided on the campaign was that there were certain people who were just basically always going to vote for, Obama no matter what. There are certain people who are going to vote against Obama no matter what. And then there were these people in the election who held the balance of or in the middle, who held the balance of the election. And we decided if we had to get outspent, that we were willing to tolerate being outspent among people who were largely decided on either pole, but that we were going to figure out ways of not getting outspent with the people in the middle who mattered the most. And so this was the kind of the urgency, the need, the sort of existential kind of concern we had that drove a lot of the innovation that came out of the data. So the first thing that was at the core of everything the Obama campaign did, whether it was advertising, the field program, certainly the digital program, anything that we did on the communications side flowed from our identification of those people in the middle. And the way that we identified them, you have a great tool in political campaigns, which is called the voter file. Everybody who registers to vote, their name appears on a list. You can purchase this list from the state and get your total closed set of all your possible voters. And what we did was we assigned a probability score to every single voter on the probability they would vote for Obama. It was a probability they would vote for Obama, which sort of told us whether they were going to be for Obama, Romney, or undecided. Everybody was scored 0 to 100. And if you were anywhere from, if your score was 25, the probability that we felt you would vote for Obama was 25%. So not very good, right? You're pretty much a Romney voter. And we were intensely focused on that band of people with the probabilities between 40% and 60%, between 45% and 55%. Those were the people who got all the attention in the campaign. Those are the people who ultimately we felt would make the difference between winning and losing. You can see from this graph, we were constantly checking our probability scores. And this probability scoring that we did on the file was something that we had been doing in the 2008 campaign, in the 2010 campaigns, and we carried it over into this campaign. There was always some directional value to these scores. What happened in the 2012 campaign, because we acquired a bunch of additional data, and because we did a lot of work trying to perfect the algorithms that came up with the scores, both in terms of reaching out to get data and also in terms of how it got processed, these scores were deadly accurate. I had a friend who called me on election night from Des Moines, Iowa, and said they just counted the absentee ballots. And the model said, see, we knew the state gives you the list of all the names of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot. But obviously you don't know how they voted. But because we had the probability scores, we projected how many votes we would get out of that finite set of people who voted absentee in Des Moines, Iowa. And my friend called me up and said that out of the 14,000 votes cast, we were supposed to come out with a lead, and in fact our lead was only off, our projection was only off by 100 votes. So, and this is anecdotal, but this turned out to be the case in all of our election results. The scores, when taken in groups, were deadly accurate. So when you have something like that, I want to just stop and think about this for a moment. This turns conventional marketing on its head. This is the exact opposite of how we usually look, particularly at advertising. Advertising usually says, here's a program, we'll tell you something about who's watching it. What we wanted to know was, here's our targets, what are they watching? Right? We looked at it the exact opposite. And when you do that, we happened to find that there were some things, some great advantages to looking at it from the target up instead of from the program down. The reason why we needed to go target up rather than program down was because we actually had very few people that fit into this group of people in the middle, those 45 to 55 scores. And the pyramid gives you an example of this. If you took every single person who could possibly be watching TV, and which is what the ratings are based on, and then you limit it to just eligible voters, which is basically people who are citizens and who are more than 18 years old and who aren't felons. And then you limit it further to registered voters. And then you limit it further beyond that to just likely voters. And then further beyond that to those that we thought would be persuadable, and our targets were a subset of that. We were talking about reaching less than 5% of the people who are viewing at any given time. And the conventional way that you buy television is that you can buy programs, and they say, well, there's a lot of, this one over indexes on women over 40. This one over indexes on people under 25. And the problem that we had was that among our targets, that top of that pyramid, there were some people were women over 40, but some weren't women over 40. And some were under 25 and some weren't under 25. We cared about the target set. We didn't care about these big, broad, over-indexing demographics sets. And not only did we care about our target set, but unlike the way you generally target, we didn't want to leave anybody off. We wanted to make sure everybody in this target set was hit. It wasn't good enough for somebody to say, well, the targets are more women than in the overall universe, and this program overperforms among women, so you'll get a big set of your targets. We wanted every single one. So we had to create a system. So we had this kind of list. We knew exactly who we wanted, the names and addresses of everybody who was a score of 45 to 65. And the traditional, and because it was so small, because it was such a small, tiny proportion of everybody watching, we had to have some way of selecting our programs and making sure that we were reaching those people above all else, that the current commercial media planning tools didn't provide. And what we ended up doing was purchasing data from these guys who collect information from cable companies. So when your TV is on, it's called a return path. The cable company needs to know that. They need to send the signal, and they store those things. And they have a record of which households are watching which programs. Now, before anybody gets freaked out, it's all anonymized. You can't go to them and say, was Andrew Bleecker watching Girls Gone Wild in Brazil last night? But he was. But they anonymize it, so they provide the information in data sets according to very specific kind of modeled demographic information that you can then match across. And we were able to basically say, where are our targets? What are they watching? And by doing that, and not only did we say what are they watching, but we said at what cost. So we created our own rating system that helped our buyers decide where do you find the chunks of our voters at the lowest cost when you buy TV. And we matched up those targets against this granular viewership data, and we knew not the ratings based on 35 plus or adult women or any of that stuff, but we had a specific rating for our targets, those 45 to 55 people. You can see what the result of this was. This chart compares our buying, our overall aggregate buying, to Romney's aggregate buying, and you can see that that in the traditional time slots where we typically buy political advertising, he bought significantly more than we did. In the places that are less typical, where you generally don't find political advertising, we ended up buying more than he did. And one place where this was a particularly stark and dramatic contrast was in cable, where we had in the aggregate literally hundreds of times more money spent on the cable stations than RNC or Romney did. And the reason was because the ratings are so sparse in the normal commercial marketplace for cable programs that it's hard to tell exactly who's watching, and that's where we were finding the little clumps of our voters at very efficient cost. And so we were able to find these folks on the cable dial and not have to go as frequently into the primetime the normal sort of news watching that typically you buy in politics. So this is an example of the entire campaign was organized around these people whose probability scores were 45 to 55, and we had to invent something. We had to find a way to use those scores to target our buys so that we wouldn't get blown out with our persuadable people, even though we were being outspent in general. And this was the process that we invented in order to do it. The final thing I'll say is the other great advantage of being in this place where you're saying, here's my targets, what are they watching, as opposed to here's the program, who's watching them, is it's perfect for integration. Because when you get ratings for television, somebody says you're buying 750 rating points for this group, that's an average for the overall group. Some of the group are going to get 250 rating points, and some of them are going to get 1,500. And because we had that data, we were able to identify the people in our target group who were being overserved by our buy and the ones who are being underserved by our buy. And this was, if somebody was being underserved by our buy and they were on the target list, I can guarantee you their mailbox was very busy around election time. And in addition, this was where we targeted a lot of our digital outreach, and that's what Andrew Bleeker is going to talk about next.
Thanks, Larry. That gives a great summary of sort of the strategy from the get-go, which is what is it that we're trying to achieve and who we're trying to reach. What I can hopefully talk about for a couple minutes is what are some of the lessons we learned from a practical perspective, and what are a couple of examples of where we got to really use this data in terms of where do we find these people once we know who they are and how we reach them. So a little bit about putting theory into practice, which is the hopefully more comical side of the evening. Kidding. So look, in many ways, the 2008 race was what gets the most credit for digital marketing, right? Because, that was the Facebook election, the social election. And actually, I think because there was such a wave, because there was so much general pent-up energy in the country, in many ways it's much less relevant to us as students of the field and frankly to practitioners today. On the other hand, I think the 2012 race, and first of all, if you think back 4 years ago, most of you are probably actually used these things 4 years ago. If you think about what Facebook was 4 years ago, right, you couldn't even post to somebody's timeline 4 years ago. It's just a brand page that didn't do you any good, right? So honestly, we raised a lot of money online in 2008, but it didn't really move our core business metrics. And if you look at where the 2012 race was successful on the money raised, as well as the fact that we still hold records on most shared pieces of content on Twitter and Facebook, things like that. Do you guys know Reddit? Okay, good. It's shocking, by the way. It's a scary place, Reddit. True. In many ways, I think the 2012 campaign was just so much more applicable to what we have to do as practitioners in the space, because it really is grinding it out on best practices, trying to be more efficient in an outspent world day in and day out. This, by the way, still holds the record for most shared piece of content on Twitter ever, which is actually how we announced the victory. So just really getting the emotion right when people are thinking about it. So a couple examples. A couple lessons I want to go through. The first is around this question of data, which I know is the back up for a second. Which is I know if 2008 was the social election, anyone who asks us anything about this election, it's always about data and analytics. So I think Larry summarized this really well, and certainly how we approached who it is we were trying to target and why. So what were some of the applications once we knew we wanted to try to reach these specific groups of people? I would say by and large, most companies, and we do this now for some of the biggest companies in the world, some of the biggest political organizations around the world. And I'll tell you, largely the problems are the same, which is why I think these lessons really apply across. Largely, most people you deal with do not have data problems. They have content problems. It's not that we don't know who we want to reach. It's that we aren't able to actually segment content to give people what they're interested in. And if you think about most companies, maybe they have one or two people doing content production. I know that's something you guys are learning here, which is I totally believe in. Because that's really the problem, which is how do we get the right content to what people are interested in? One of the things that drove us the most crazy in 2008 was that we had this amazing data gathering information. We have people knocking on your doors every day, all around the country. And people were telling us stuff, but then, so I might go up to Larry's door and he might tell me he's interested in the environment. And the next piece of mail or ads or emails or social media he gets might be about taxes, right? We didn't have a way to put the, information from one channel again into the other. So how does this all start to look from a big data perspective? Despite the fact that I said it's not about data, the one key piece that I think we really invested in was really trying to put all of our targets into one place. Because normally when you start talking to marketers or communications folks, we talk about our audience as targets, and we largely do it by channel. And frankly, that is a little bit endemic of the way our industry is, which is that we tend to have PR firms and ad agencies and digital shops, and it actually doesn't bode well for what we're trying to do, which is talk to the same people across all these things, right? And so ideally, the one thing, to Larry's point, is it only works because the biggest difference in terms of implementing it from the 08 to 10 to 12 elections, one was that we actually believed in the data. Two, that technology was far enough along that we were actually able to treat people as individuals and create a single database for everyone across channels. So we had one ID for someone, whether they were on our email list, our social platforms, or in the field. And we could give them more content. So if we knew you were interested in the environment, we could give you more content about the environment and so forth. But data is also, I really believe, a culture of data. It's a culture of being data-driven in our communications. It's a culture of testing. This is actually our most successful donation page on the campaign. And frankly, we thought we were pretty good at this when we started this campaign. We'd already done one before. That one went okay. We thought we had a pretty good handle on this. And there's a phrase I like a lot, which if you don't know, you'll learn, called the highest paid person's opinion. And generally speaking, in creative agencies, the way this works is that the agency or the team puts together a couple of proposals, and someone, sometimes it gets to be me, gets to decide, I like this one, and that's what we go with. And data can really help get us away from this model, which is that there's no way to always know what people are going to like best, but we can find out. So this is not at all where we started on the campaign, and again, we started with a couple years of research to begin with. This page worked 4 times better than our first page. We did about 4,000 variations of tests to get here. So just iterating on really little things. What should it say? Should there be a photo? Should there be a video? How much money should we ask for? Little things like that. How many steps should it be? All these things really dramatically improve the experience and really are fundamental to how we look at communication. So the concept of testing really has to be part of communications going forward. Literally, if we hadn't done this, we would have been outspent pretty badly. Data gets particularly interesting when you look at social media. How many people on here are tweeting right now? A number, and I see the laptops. Social has a tremendous amount of data and information, and I think it's where we get to some of the most interesting uses of this data. Real quick example. This here is actually an email. Social data is powerful to me for 2 reasons. One is because who here has ever watched a focus group? I'm sorry, quite a few, by the way. Focus groups are like really deathly boring, right? But what they will tell you is that nobody believes anything we have to say anymore as institutions of authority. And so we all suffer from a huge credibility problem, even, presidents, CEOs, particularly CEOs, et cetera. And one of the challenges is how do we get, who's actually credible anymore? And the only answer is your friends. And in particular, we found that it wasn't just that we needed your friends to get the message out, but we had plenty of followers, but our followers were in places like this, Southern California, New York, right? We needed to reach people in Cleveland and Miami and places like that. And if you post something on Facebook today, maybe 15-20% of your friends actually see it. So we needed friends talking to friends, but the right friends, the 5-10% on Larry's list, not just anyone they happen to know in Southern California. So once we could get social data, this is actually an email that says, Andrew, I need you to talk to these 3 friends because they happen to be those persuadable voters in Cleveland. So we can get darn targeted in our communications with social data. And obviously it changed our online advertising. To Larry's point, we've moved from I call it people, not places. So we've moved from a largely, website or TV channel method of buying over to an individual one. The second point I want to talk about briefly is just what I think is the difference between some of the traditional communications and digital. Traditional media is the best means you have of hitting someone over the head. And I mean that with a lot of respect to traditional media, in that it's really the best thing possibly out there to get message to a lot of people very quickly. And if you say it enough times, people will remember it. That's what gross ratings points are about. What digital is particularly not good at that. What digital has the advantage of, however, is potentially being able to build relationships. So when you looked at some of the amount of money we raised, over $700 million online, we did that, and believe me, we spent a lot of money on advertising and other methods to get it. We never once asked for money directly. And the reason is people couldn't get there mentally. They couldn't get from waking up in the morning and dealing with their kids and going online and going to work to, I have to also give money to this guy. And believe me, if you work for anyone else, every company in the world, believe me, no one gets up in the morning and says, wow, I want to go advocate for Xerox today, or pick your company, right? So how do we get them to do it? Because obviously it's possible. And we really believe that whether it's corporate advocacy, selling product, or electing presidents, that it's all about building relationships. So how do we get someone in the door? Maybe they're not willing to buy our product on day one or vote for our guy or give us money, but maybe they are willing to learn a little more. Give us that email address. Follow us on social media. Enough that we can start to have a conversation, start to build a relationship. Maybe at first they're just willing to sign Michelle Obama's birthday card, which if you can get people to do that, I highly recommend it. Works very well. But maybe then they're willing to watch a video. Maybe then they're willing to come to an event. And then when there's a deadline, when there's something urgent, then we can get them to act, which is our philosophy. Also building relationships, I think we need to take a look at our metrics, because I don't think some of them are particularly helpful. And I know a lot of the technology, when you learn to talk about analytics and pattern recognition, uses these metrics because they're the only metrics we have, which is a problem with our industry. But when we talk about success on social, we tend to talk about things like shares and likes and that sort of thing. People talking about this, the Facebook metrics. If you want something to go viral, I highly recommend dogs. Children also work, depending on the children. Right? But the question is, so what? Right? I can get plenty of people to share photos of Bo. But I'm not sure that's helping us, to Larry's point, define the economic argument. I'm not sure that's right. I mean, though he's cute. He's gotten bigger since then. Right, but it's not helping us define whether I'm going to vote for this guy or who's looking out for me. So the problem is, some of the ads that we ran were what you might call negative, I would call contrast, helped get to this point, right? But frankly, it didn't work for us on social media, right? Because people don't want to share things that make them look mean. People want to share things that make them look smart or funny or interesting. And so how do we deal with this? How do we have a more substantive conversation? It's not about dogs, but that really gets to our issues. Our best approach to this, and I found, particularly when you work for companies and CEOs that have credibility issues, what would they actually believe and what matters? And we found a lot of success leading with facts and with data. It's a very natural thing to share. It makes you look smart, makes you look interesting, and people also have the added benefit of believing it. So for instance, this chart here on the bottom left is one of our most successful pieces of content on the campaign. It's a chart of jobs lost by month under Bush and ultimately gained under the president. In one little chart, it makes our whole case, right? Things are getting better. It's slow, but things are getting better. It was one of the most shared pieces of content online. It did so well, we put it into focus groups. All of a sudden, wow, it's taken off everywhere. It's in our TV ads, right? It was one integrated communications program, leading with facts. And we found the more you put, you put the source on there that's credible, put the date on there, it all really helps the credibility. And obviously, our opponent was nice enough to give us some facts of his own, depending on what you watch. And then the last thing, just really quickly, I want to talk a little about timing. Because when I plan campaigns, or when we plan campaigns, it's not so much a static medium, right? People aren't interested in the same level every day. Particularly when it comes to the internet, people are interested in spurts. They care about you one day, all of a sudden no one's paying attention. Then you're in the news and everyone cares, right? And this is why a lot of people in politics end up going into crisis communications, because it feels very, typical to us. We don't think of it as a crisis. That's just getting up in the morning. But so how can we deal with this? So the way we look at planning is that there's some moments. We basically plan around moments, and there are two types of moments. What I call organic moments, or things that are going to happen anyway, right? And in politics, there's going to be an election. There are going to be debates and a convention, and the other guy's got to get nominated, things like that. And there are things that we don't know about. But as we try to plan our events, there's a lot of gaps between, say, the beginning of a campaign and the convention. So how do we create our own moments to get some excitement and some urgency along the way and plan around those? One of my all-time favorites was this Clint Eastwood situation. Truthfully, I have no idea what was going on here. And as far as I've since now done a couple panels like this with the Romney team, and they didn't either. So at least makes me feel a little bit better. This is one of the things that I think is really interesting is how do we take the data piece that we're doing and put it into real time. We were watching this in our headquarters, equally confused, but we were actively monitoring the social media conversation. We were actively monitoring to see what people's going, and this was going crazy, right? The whole internet was focused on the speech. Nobody was sure what was going on, and even though it's risky to attack, or make a little fun of Clint Eastwood, which believe me it was, and we were scared about this internally. This is after you've got to imagine a week of the Republicans totally owning the airwaves, right? The whole Republican convention is their opportunity. But yet, we put out one piece of content a couple minutes after their speech, and it was the most shared and discussed piece of content for that entire week. So all the free media they got, all the paid media they had, which we didn't have enough money to respond with in kind, we actually were able to drive the conversation. And he gave this whole speech about the empty chair, and we responded with "this seat's taken," and a photo of the president, and that was what people were talking about. So if the real-time nature of this is getting faster and faster, and I have one last example that talks about it, which is the debates. I have a good friend of mine at enough of you are tweeting that I won't tell you which publication, as a major reporter. And he told me that he wasn't able to watch the debates because the competition in journalism is so fierce that he was told he had to have his piece done by the end of the debate. So we spent the first 20 minutes reading Twitter to get a summary of what was going on, and he had to start writing his article, which is a pretty scary state of journalism for those that have followed this for some time. But so, when it used to be in the debates that winning the debate wasn't so much about the debate itself, right, because not everyone watched, but it was about what was in the newspaper the next morning, right? That was sort of the question of were you able to win the discussion of or not for the people that hadn't seen it. And that is gone. It is now a real-time game. The next morning is long, distant memory compared to who was winning 10 minutes in. Which staff makes it to the spin room first. I mean, crazy things. But we're talking about real-time fights during the debates. So one of the things that we tried to do was actually be relevant in that conversation. So this is where our press and our earned media piece really tied in with our paid media component. One of the things we did is we actually we knew people were watching online, right? Like 70 million people watched one of these, and at least 2 of them went well for us. So it doesn't matter. One of the things that we did is we actually bought the online ad real estate next to the places people were watching this stuff and put in our Twitter feeds. So if there was a debate about something, we say, oh, no, that's not true, here's the facts, or provide evidence into what people are doing. So it's a real-time conversation, owning the conversation during the actual events itself. So it's very short, but just a couple key trends, and then we'll do a little panel and take some questions. As you think about this, I say a couple of thoughts to leave you with. One is, ultimately, to Larry's point, the strategy has to come first, and you have to have a goal. A lot of these things are tactics, right? They're almost all tactics we're talking about tonight. And, they can do a lot of different things well in communications. You can raise money, you can get a message across, you can brand a product, but you probably can't do all those things at the same time. And so you really have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and to hold yourself accountable to pretty clear metrics at the end. Ultimately, message trumps these tactics, right? If your message is off, there's very little that you can do. I could take the entire Obama digital analytics and paid media teams and put them on another campaign with a poor message and a poor candidate, and there'd be nothing we could do for them. So you really, really have to ultimately understand the message first. Credibility is really king. We use the phrase "let's spin on the ball," but people are pretty smart. I know that's not how you probably assume that political consultants think about the public, but we actually do, right? We know that their bullshit meter is pretty strong. So we've got to be credible, we've got to be real with these people, or it's not going to work. And ultimately, it's integrated across everything we're doing. And then ultimately, from a digital perspective, the one thing I would say is that whether you're a company or a nonprofit or particularly a company or a campaign, even though you must have some really clear, obvious thing that you do that makes you stay in business, it's not clear why I shouldn't engage with you online and give you my time, even frankly for a campaign, and sorry for those of you who are still on our email list. But there has to be a value proposition. There has to be some reason why I'm going to engage with you. I'm going to give you that piece of information. I'm going to give you my time. And I think as you're thinking about campaigns, it's that strategy. It's ultimately understanding why we should engage. That's the most important. So hopefully that was a couple examples of where data can fit in and how we use it. And we're happy to take questions on the panel. All good. Yeah.
Dan? Should we sit in the middle? I'm going to take Dan. Okay. That was really fabulous. It really was. I want to thank both of you for sharing those ideas and insights. Since this is the Academy, I mean, we'll eventually, I want to get to some tactical questions, because I think they were really fascinating, but I want to ask my fellow professor here, does this strike you as a little bit anti-democratic with a small d? That if you have more money and more resources and different kind of ideas, that you can convince, if you target the right 45 to 55% of the public, and you win. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. What are your thoughts on kind of the larger context of these changes over time?
Boy, first of all, and you guys got a deserved round of applause, and I just want to add my voice to it. I told my students in class on Tuesday as we began our section on online media, I said, guys, everything we've talked about all semester long is something I know more about than anyone else in the world. Starting today for the next 3 weeks, it's something that I know absolutely nothing about. But come here, Larry and Jeremy, on Thursday, and you'll learn everything you need to about it. You guys were terrific. They took more notes in the last 40 minutes than they have in the last 11 weeks in my class, so thank you very much. Ernie, I'm not entirely sure I agree with your premise. And I thought, if anything, one of the main points I got out of Larry's portion of the presentation is that money is not determinative, as President Romney and Governor Whitman would agree, I think. What Larry pointed out, if you looked at the chart he showed on how the Romney and the Obama campaigns spent their money, it was very, very instructive. It wasn't so much that the Obama campaign wildly outspent Romney, but they spent smarter. Now, I no longer work in campaigns, but follow them closely enough to know that in addition to how wisely these guys targeted their money, there was all sorts of speculation about why the Romney campaign allocated their funding so poorly, buying at the last minute, paying exorbitant amounts and so on. But even beyond that, I thought Larry's chart made an extraordinary point, is that when you are targeting your message at such a small percentage of the electorate, simply carpet bombing isn't good enough, because you are convincing the same people over and over again. In the military, the phrase they use is making the rubble bounce. You've bombed a target, you've destroyed it, and you keep bombing it. Why? Because you want to see the rubble bounce. And once you have convinced your campaign's strongest supporter to vote for you, you just keep running ads at them over and over again, because that's the way, well, maybe not you, but that's the way Larry and I were brought up running campaigns. And I think that the Obama campaign, to their credit, stepped back from that, and as Larry demonstrated very ably, said it's not just about the amount of money, it's how you spend it. And just very briefly, and then I'll shut up, I would argue that in fact, the evolution of online messaging from really in less than 20 years of political history, I think if anything has small d democratized the political process by giving a voice not just to anchor men and to candidates engaging in a one-way conversation down at the electorate, but allowing the voters to talk back, not only talk back up to power, but engage in not just a two-way conversation, but a multi-way conversation. So small d, guys, but a much more democratic environment.
I see Andy and Larry agreeing. So you want to elaborate a little bit on your thought about how this fits into the broader issue of greater, lesser democracy?
Well, one thing that I think the online communications environment has done is people have a much more nuanced understanding of issues today than they used to in campaigns. And you only have to look at the tax issue. It used to be that and I'm sorry, I'm going to make a partisan point here, Dan, but it's not personal. But it used to be a Democrat would be for a tax increase, and a Republican would say he's for a tax increase, therefore your taxes are going to go up. And Democrats would argue over and over and over again, no, it's these other people. It's there's not everybody's go up. And it didn't matter. Most people would say, oh, he wants to raise taxes, mine are going to go up. People have a much more nuanced understanding of the tax issue today than they ever used to. That doesn't work anymore. We actually, in the 2008 campaign, defeated McCain on the tax issue. And the reason was because they adopted this nuanced way of looking at it, whose taxes are going to go up. And one of the reasons why they were able to have that nuanced understanding was because Bleecker and his team created a tax calculator, and anybody could go on, punch in a little bit of information about themselves, find out whether they're going to get a tax cut or their taxes are going to go up if the Obama plan passed or if the McCain plan passed. This thing was so persuasive to people when we showed it to them that we actually ran TV ads telling them to go to the website, and if they wanted to find out who was telling the truth about taxes, they could actually go in and see it for themselves. So people have a far more nuanced view now than they used to because of this array of information that's coming their way. And that's the democratization, I think, that comes with this digital age.
Andy?
Well, not to mention funding. I mean, if it was, if it wasn't for the internet, we would have lost twice to some big money special interest. So I think there's some. Look, it's still not easy to do this, and money helps, but there's at least more of a chance.
Let me ask Larry this really fascinating issue of that 45-55% group. Could you just kind of walk us through the mechanics
Sure.
of how you get that? I think some of our students would be really interested in just step by step. How do you get to 45 and 55?
So what you have is you have a voter file that, as I mentioned before, has all the registered voters, and there are certain things that you automatically know about people from that file. You know their name and their address. You know what their age is, because you got to put your age on that voter registration form. You know what party they've registered for. And also, the state keeps track of what's called voter history, which is everybody knows that little old lady in tennis shoes who's sitting off, checking off your name when you go to vote. That gets put on the file. So we know the people who voted in this election or didn't vote in that election. And that tells us a lot about their attitudes toward voting. So that's the fundamental data that you start with for everybody. Of course, you don't know how they voted, but you know those things. Then you usually enhance that file with the census data. So do you live in an area that has characteristics of income and ethnicity and education? How far do you commute to go to work? All kinds of things like that the census collects that you can append to a database in this. Then we added to that what we sort of is a commercial file, which is a file that's kept by one of the commercial services that has all kinds of different things that scores people on the likelihood that they subscribe to Field and Stream magazine, or the kind of car that they are likely to drive, or the likelihood that there's children in the household. All kinds of things. I think there's 2,500 different categories in this commercial file. And then finally, well, actually, I'm sorry, not quite finally. Then for the Obama campaign, we had extraordinary contact with people. As Andrew was saying, we would knock on people's door. Do you want a lawn sign? Yes or no? That got marked down. Ultimately, that was in the database. Do you want to? What issues are you interested in? Are you for Obama or McCain? Are you for the Democrat for Congress or the Republican for Congress? Every time we had a conversation with people, tens of millions by the month, those things all got put on the file. And then finally, and this is finally this time, we did a lot of surveying of people for the specific purpose of perfecting the file, or I'm sorry, of perfecting the scores. The scores would tell us, gosh, there's a lot of ambiguous people here that we just don't know enough about, so that the model isn't predicting them well enough. So we would try and find sets of those people and ask them the surveys and get more data specifically for the purpose of that file. So then you take that entire string of data that you've got for every individual and you mash it up in basically one big regression, and you see that the kinds of things that are common among people who are for Obama and against Obama. And from that is derived the probability scores. Of all the things that I told you, the things that were the biggest drivers of predicting people's vote were the fundamental, simple stuff that come on the file, and the stuff that we did at the very end to protect the file. Everything else had, or I'm sorry, to perfect the model. Everything else had, most of those little variables had some impact on the predictive scores, but most of them very, very little. The big drivers were those two things, and by doing that, we were able to assign a probability. Just imagine if you're a mattress salesman and you're seeing people go by on the sidewalk all day, and you know for sure there's a number on their forehead that says the likelihood that they're going to buy a mattress today. That's a valuable piece of information, right? And this is kind of the type of value you get when you can sort of pinpoint the kind of people who are, or the likelihood that any given person that you encounter is for you or against you, or the gold of it all, the undecideds or the people you can't predict.
Well, let me ask you this. Who does that? I mean, we've got students in the audience who want to go out and work for political campaigns or commercial campaigns. And so you've got 4 different variables sort of laid out in a linear fashion. Somebody's got to figure out what the relative weights are and what should go in it and how do you combine that. Are they combiners? What do you call this new profession?
So we had a group of analysts. I think on the 08 campaign, we probably had 8 or 10 of them. On this campaign, we had more like 50. A number, I think a relatively high percentage of them were people who had PhDs in mathematics or economics, people who build econometric models, and a lot of people who, if they didn't have PhDs, had advanced degrees in training in mathematics and economics, some from the sort of the hard science side of political science, those kinds of things. So that was the skill set that group of people brought. There's a second group of people that are essential to this, which are, I'm not sure if this is the right term of art for those who are knowledgeable, but I think of it as data engineers, because these are big, huge files that all have to be mashed together. And we had to have people who were able to manage the data. And this is far beyond me, but from what I'm told, this is a really big deal, a very difficult thing to do, that sort of data management piece of this. And so those are the kind of people, and I'll tell you something very interesting. A lot of these people work in technical fields, and they never in their lives assumed that they would be working on a political campaign. This wasn't sort of what they'd thought of. And there was a great kind of meshing of cultures with, typical political types like me and like Andrew, although Andrew's as smart as those guys are, but guys like me and the people who came from these more technical fields. And it really made for a vibrant culture in the campaign, and we valued them a great deal. And they were really excited about the kind of hurly-burly of the campaign and the nature of being in this sort of idealistic endeavor. So it was a really great environment to work in.
Let me ask you just one more question on that. I mean, I'm thinking of a political campaign, and there's this guy, usually a guy, chomping on a cigar, that's been out for 3 days, and he's talking politics. So who's the person who
Is that Jeff Eller?
So who's the person who mediates between the nerds and the politicos? I mean, you've got 2 very different cultures, right? And they're, one is wearing pocket protectors and the other is smoking cigars. So.
It's interesting. We had some. This is not far. By the way, what the dean's describing is really not far off. We have a language in politics. There's things that we can say in shorthand because in campaigns we're used to, talking about certain things and everybody understands. And of course, there's the same on the data side. And there were not infrequently times when we would talk to these guys about different projects that were going or things that we needed, and there was a disconnect. And there actually turned out to be a handful of very, very useful, let's call them bilingual people, who were, who were well versed in the nature of how a lot of the technical analytical work was done, but also kind of could dumb it down for the rest of us. Right. And there were a few of them. We didn't like sort of start by trying to hire that position, but we pretty quickly identified the people that we could most effectively interact with, and they brought particularly. And Andrew's one of them, by the way. Is extraordinary technical understanding, but he sort of came up more in the traditional political world.
So that's a course we obviously need to teach at the Annenberg School, is bilingual translation between. Well, I do want to go to something that Andy said that was really interesting. It's point number 2, cultivate your audience. And I wonder if you could say something a little bit more about that. I mean, how do you identify the audience, and then how do you decide how to cultivate that audience?
Absolutely. No, it's tough, and it really starts with, what are you trying to get people to do? What's your goal? For us, we, largely, the people that are actively engaging with you online already are for you. It's less of a persuasion activity. That's why our persuasion tends to be more of our communications, our press, our PR, and our media, as opposed to the people that are engaging with you on social or on email on your site. So in that case, it's more supporters. So this might be someone who's at least interested in us or somewhat supportive, but we need to move them up the chain, because somewhat supportive is helpful, but doesn't really do me a ton of good. It's certainly not something I'm going to spend my time or money on. What I really want is people are going to do something for me. How do I get people to a point where they're coming to my events? In particular, how do I get people who are going to come volunteer for us? We had a huge army of volunteers that really drove our whole field program. Or how do we get people that are going to maybe also be able to write a check or put in their credit card? And most of those people, that was not their first activity. Almost nobody shows up as a volunteer day one. Almost nobody shows up as a donor day one. They show up as interested. Back in 2008 was this guy with a funny name. Am I gonna get on board with this, or am I gonna go the other direction? And so that's where we start, which is people that are interested. We call it soft supporters, or new folks. And then how do we get them into, maybe we can get them into an activism track. We can get them into a donor track. And then a lot of that is about how do we find out what they're interested in, right? And how do we make sure that the content we give them is relevant? So email, I think, is particularly good at this, and it's been around a little bit longer. Though email, I still think, is the killer app, by the way. I know everything's about social, but way more activity comes from email than comes from social across any sector, whether you're Amazon or us or Apple or anybody else. And a lot of that is because, if you think about Amazon, great example, we're not as good as that, but we try. You can email us about the things you just watched. Here's suggestions of movies we think you might like, or products we think you might like to buy. And the same is true in our world, which is that based on your activity, we know what kind of emails you're opening. We know which, and more importantly, which you're not opening. What kind of content you're sharing around. And so hopefully, if we're doing our jobs right, we can be listening to that and start to deliver you more relevant content. And if we get someone who's just a little bit interested in us, but we find out that they have, maybe they're interested in women's health, and all of a sudden we can get them to join Women for Obama. And then, here's a Women Obama event near you. Oh, Michelle's coming to town. Why don't you go to, and all of a sudden we can move them up the chain.
That's helpful. Dan, this is sort of the big deal national presidential campaign. But as someone who has worked both nationally but also at the state level and local level, how do you think these insights are going to sort of find their way into other campaigns that are maybe less sophisticated, that don't have the same amount of money?
I will defer, at least in a minute, to Andy and Larry on this, but I'll offer you one assessment. Watching, as I know many of you guys are watching the Los Angeles mayor's race. When you're working on a presidential campaign, or observing a presidential campaign, particularly in the last couple months of a general election, there is no shortage of information through traditional media sources. The newspapers, the television, and so on are giving more than adequate amounts of information to all but the most obsessed and disturbed portions of the electorate. If you're running a campaign for mayor, even in a city like Los Angeles, or a campaign for school board or for city council, there is a much greater dearth, a much greater paucity of information available through traditional mass media sources. And so, again, and we're seeing this right now between Garcetti and Gruhl, and even to a greater degree in the primary, they're relying on these techniques to an even greater degree than the presidential campaigns, because they have to. Because these guys very effectively run walk the line between traditional, what us old people call traditional media, and online media, that balance doesn't exist in a local race, because that traditional media coverage, if it exists, is much less impactful. So the techniques that these guys are talking about end up making a much greater difference. You mind, Ernie, if I ask Andy a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Andy, I thought that Ernie's question to you about that gradual sort of evolution of involvement was fascinating. And what I heard you say, if I can paraphrase, is the following, which is online communication, whether it's email or social networking, is a terrific way of motivating your existing supporters. You can motivate them, you can organize them, you can mobilize them. And what you implied is it's a much less effective way of reaching that last 5% that Larry was talking about. And what I assume from that is, because if I'm going to access a message online, I have to initiate action. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you can use traditional online and social networking tools, not just for motivation, as you talked about earlier, but for persuasion of voters who don't have the inclination to go to your website, to click on your link, and so on.
No, it's a great question. And honestly, in 2008, we were able to do the former, and we focused a lot on activation. And frankly, that's because we had plenty of support. In 2012, we really had to work on this issue, which is, yes, you're right, we had plenty of fans, but those weren't our persuadable voters. But how did we try to go find our persuadable voters? And this is a much tougher game. The good news is, I think there are ways we can do it. Certainly, it's more costly. Right, so obviously 100 plus of online advertising helped, million, which is a bonus. But obviously you're going to see that at frankly higher percentages as you look at some of these races, Senate races, House races, mayor's races, things like that. So paid is a big piece of it, advertising. But even that email, the social example I explained is a huge one. So the goal of people on our list, like if they're on our list or are following us on Facebook or Twitter, really needs to be sharing. Everything I put out has to be optimized for sharing, because I don't care about those people, but I care about their friends, and in particular, I care about them being the messenger as opposed to us being the messenger for our content. So I do think social and email can work, but it's got to be with an eye towards getting people to talk to each other.
Let's open it up to the audience. Yes, sir, and please identify yourself. I guess we have 2 microphones that we can communicate from. So please identify yourself, and then we'll...
Yes, Dennis Kaiser with PRSA in Los Angeles. This is a tactical question, and on the integrated approach that you talked about. How did you prioritize the channels, and how did the folks that were accustomed to some of the traditional channels that you had used before, how did they view the new channels? Was there some sort of light bulb that kind of went off in their head?
Well, I think that if you're doing this stuff smart, you're sort of, you're kind of medium agnostic. Really you're basically saying, what's the best tool for getting the message out? I'm going to give you an example. Andrew mentioned that chart, the jobs chart. And I can only say, and I don't believe in gloating, but I do have to say this. I was on a panel with one of the top advertising people for the Romney campaign in Chicago a few weeks ago, and we showed some ads, and I put up one with the jobs chart on it, and she said, "Oh, there's that damn chart," which was so gratifying. And what happened was, early in the campaign, we started showing people in focus groups this chart, and they had 2 reactions. One was, "Oh my God, I had forgotten how terrible it was when Obama took over." When they saw those bars going down, it reminded them, and believe me, this relieves a lot of pressure in terms of how they judged him. And second, they said, "I didn't know we had positive job growth for 20 straight months." So one little chart, static, doesn't have to talk to you, doesn't have to move very much. One little chart. And Andrew and I talked about it, and this is like some of the cheapest advertising you can buy online is a display ad. And this is something that lends itself well to a display ad. And so we talked about how much would it take to get as many people to saturate every target state so everybody saw this, who could possibly see it online would see this chart. And that was the first online persuasion buy that we did. And, we didn't have to do pre-roll, we didn't have to do video, we didn't have to do the really high premium expensive stuff because this chart was so effective. And later, as Andrew said, we put it on not just one TV ad, but 3 or 4. And so most people in target states are familiar with that chart. So what I'm trying to do in managing the ad campaign is say, this is a piece of content, and this is perfect for our online advertising campaign. The second thing is there's the same thing separate from content, the same thing's true of some targets. Dan was talking earlier about the differences in how we did buys. I'm absolutely certain that there are some people, even though the Romney campaign and their allies combined spend more money than we did, I'm absolutely certain that there are some people that are in that tiny little target set that they never spoke with. Because you got to go out and find them in a very targeted way. And so when we found people we were not able to reach on television, if they were in the target group, immediately Andrew started figuring out where are those people hanging out online. And we could target just as accurately on online advertising, actually better online than we do on television. So we made sure, we paid a premium to reach those people who we weren't able to get on television. So I think you got to be medium agnostic. You got to basically say, where's the ducks? That's where we got to hunt.
Go to this side of the room. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Jesse Switzer. I'm a graduate student in the SBR program. I'm actually managing a state assembly campaign right now. And when you talked about, Andy, that traditional media is a place where you can really hammer people over the head. It got me thinking about a conversation that we've been having a lot on the campaign about how much to actually talk to our prospective voters over email. I imagine that there was a pretty scientific campaign that you're talking about, and there was obviously a lot of science behind what you said, but I was wondering a little bit more about the science behind how often you said it and how often you communicated with people before they decided to say, oh, this is too much.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really good question. Sorry about those emails.
Does this ever stop, by the way? Or
No, it turns out. No.
The eternal campaign.
No comment. Our belief is there's no such thing as too much. There is such thing as too boring. And truthfully, if you have bad content, one email a month is too much. Or content that isn't relevant to people. And that's why understanding what people are interested in and what they're not is so important. To give you a sense of context, for any email that went out nationally, first of all, we sent very little nationally. And any email that went out, we probably tested 4 or 5 totally different pieces of content, and within those, different senders and different subject lines. So we knew pretty darn well if this was an email that had any chance of being engaging or not. And who should probably receive it. And then obviously their judgment calls be made. So there's a cost of sending too much, which means people tune out. And so early in the campaign, that would be very costly. Right at the end, I'm willing to take the extra couple bucks potentially and deal with the unsubscribes.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Angela Baldwin. I'm with PRSA LA member. You talked about the integrated marketing approach. What I'd like to know, maybe an example of how you had to cater your messaging to different mediums, whatever you were using, so direct mail versus social. We know that it's a different audience, different people responding. I work in nonprofit PR, and that's something that we come across. But can you give an example of maybe how you had to modify for the online audience or social audience?
Sure. I think one of the big issues we dealt with is healthcare. It was certainly a major piece of the president's first term. And we need to do a ton of research to understand how do we talk about this? Because there are ways to talk about healthcare that are wholly negative for us. And frankly, those are some of the easiest ways to talk about it. New program, very expensive. But there are plenty of really compelling pieces of content and changes in the law. But if people only understood what on earth they were, they would like it. And so one of the things that we spent a lot of time on is how do we talk about this, and what pieces do we need to talk about to whom? So for instance, Social Security might be particularly relevant to people of a certain age. maybe a little less relevant on social media. On the other hand, staying on your parents' plan until you're 26 might be attractive to people in this room. Grad students, for instance, right? So obviously, who we're trying to reach and the message really differed a lot there. And it wasn't solely channel-based, but that was certainly, social and direct mail tend to reach different audiences.
We also, in our business, there's you not only have the consideration of what you're delivering to the audience, but then there's news coverage of the messages that we send out. And so you have to figure out how high you want to amp something up in terms of the kind of coverage it's going to attract. We did a project, interestingly, at the beginning of 12, I guess it was the beginning of the year. And I had noticed that in our polls, there was always a real close relationship between people's views of the Affordable Care Act and their favorability rating toward the president. And we thought that maybe if we took just a tiny little sliver of people, but again, they were part of that 45 to 55 group, and started to just inform them, as Andrew said, about a few of the positive features of the Affordable Care Act, that we could kind of lift their viewpoint toward the Affordable Care Act over time, which would then kind of ease the pressure on their viewpoints toward the president. And so we sent out a series of mailings, and it turned out in all the research that we did that there was sort of certain age groups of women that were most responsive to these messages, to this subgroup of women who were part of that 45 to 55. And over the course of about 2 months of these mailings, their net favorability toward the Affordable Care Act increased by 11%. And my feeling was if we did this early and we just kept kind of reminding them, as we were doing this in the mail, Andrew was targeting these same people online, and there was very, very little written about this. It wasn't, so we didn't go on TV and have a bunch of people say, oh, Obama's all worried about the Health Care Act and what it's going to do and so forth. And my thinking was if we just kept nurturing these same people over and over through the campaign, that would pay dividends in the election. Now, there was an intervening event, which was the Supreme Court ruling on health care, and that really kind of changed attitudes in a way that this kind of little subtle campaign we'd been running didn't anticipate. And so it turned out we didn't need it. But it does give you an example of something that was integrated. It was below the radar screen. It wasn't intended to be a big broadcast message that would get a lot of attention and analysis and second guessing. That we tried with some success.
I'm going to take 2 questions at the same. I don't want to lose our audience, and I don't want to run too late. So we'll take a question here, and then we'll have an answer from the panel. Yes, sir.
All right. Good evening. I'm Tyler Tyberski, president of the Political Science Undergraduate Association here at USC. And I was wondering what the political implications were for running a campaign that's based on this very small target group in a country of over 300 million people, when a candidate then wins office and then tries to claim a mandate of general appeal to the entire country after so much of the campaign has been focused on just this small cross-section. How do you then say, now I have a mandate to rule over everyone, I'm a candidate of the people? Thank you.
Dan, why don't you start that, then, and we'll give them time to sort of collect their thoughts on this, and then we'll...
I think the question points to a real challenge, less for candidates and their advisors, but for voters. I think the reason that people as talented as these guys can segment and target the electorate is not only because the tools allow them to, but because the voters allow them to. And some of you have taken my classes in the past have heard this discussion before, and I apologize for the message repetition. But you know the great thing, sorry, Jenna?
She said, no, you don't, but that's okay.
But if the biggest change from the era in which Larry and I first got involved in politics to this era that these guys are talking about so effectively is the level of responsibility, the measure of responsibility has changed. Instead of there being an editor in New York or in Washington or in downtown Los Angeles, instead of there being an anchorman at NBC or CBS or ABC or one of the cable networks deciding what's news and what's not, each one of us decides for ourselves. Nick Kristof, the New York Times columnist, refers to the me network, which I think is a terrific phrase, because what technology allows us to do is to construct our own information environment. And that information environment never challenges us, it never causes us to question anything, it merely reinforces what we already believe. And if you think about it, that's based on human nature. Human nature is that I want to talk to and listen to and hear from the smartest people in the world. Who are the smartest people in the world? The people who agree with me. And sometimes you find them on Fox News, other people find them on MSNBC, but instead of engaging into discussion with people who disagree with you, instead of exposing yourself to a range of opinions, it's really easy to burrow into an ideological cul-de-sac and just reinforce what you already believe. If more voters were willing to avail themselves to a greater range of information sources and opinion sources, it would be much harder for these guys and their Republican counterparts to micro-target the electorate the way they do. And because they do it, that they do it and they do it so well, is not anything they should be ashamed of. If anything, like I said, it's not their responsibility, it's ours, to say, thank you, Mr. Grisolano, for that message, but I do want to expose myself to people who I haven't heard from otherwise. And so when a candidate gets elected, Democrat or Republican, according to these rules that we have established, not them, you're exactly right. They do have a tougher time claiming a mandate. And I think one of the reasons that the president has struggled is because so many of the voters simply aren't willing on either side, D or R, to expose themselves to a broader range of information discussion. But they can't change it. Actually, if you can, that would be great. But something tells me that's beyond even your guys' capabilities.
I mean, I actually have a slightly different cut on this. You know, the first point I made was we started with a strategy. And the strategy was the largest, most unifying message that encapsulated the greatest number of voters, right? And in fact, by point of fact, by a 3-2 margin, all Americans were more concerned about the decline of the middle class than they were about the speed of recovery. So that wasn't just the narrow group. The existence of the narrow group was a concern that we were going to be outspent. And we were willing to be outspent by people who had already made up their decision one way or the other. The people who were, we're in the information business and we're in the persuasion business. And the people to whom we needed to deliver persuasive information were those people in the middle. And they got the greatest volume of information. But it wasn't at the exclusion of the others, because those folks, you just, from a television standpoint, there's no way to be on a program and only talk to your targets. So I honestly don't think it is the case that this was sort of a campaign tailored to at a strategic message level to a narrow group of people. Instead, it was one that was very inclusive, had the broadest possible kind of unifying effect on public opinion, but the people who needed to hear the most additional persuasive information were served up the most information.
I'm sorry, we'll jump here. Betsy, why don't you? I didn't do what I said I was going to do.
I was just going to give up my question to this young student, but I could at least say I'm Betsy Berkemer, and I compliment you from Obama's campaign for finally reaching the women's audience in the end.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Wilson. I am a student studying political science here. My question has two parts. First of all, do you think that what you learned about data analysis and implementation was specific to the particularities of Obama's campaign and his message and the political climate at the time? Or do you think it has broader implications and that the field of political communication has been permanently revolutionized by the 2008 and 2012 campaigns? The second part is, what do you see the next strategic innovation in this field being?
Good one. Do I think they're just unique to us? No. I use them to sell soap all the time and other things like that. In terms of where we're headed, right now, as I said, this is really a content problem, which means that, we had a digital team of 200 and we weren't able to create nearly enough content to give everyone what they're interested in. If anything, we probably were only able to use 10 or 15% of all the data we had. I think the question is when the technology catches up to make this a little more automated, all of a sudden then we can start to have a little bit more tailored conversations, both in terms of what people are interested in. I think you're going to see a huge amount more local information, which is a huge factor, but when, as presidential campaigns and big brands, it's really hard to customize that kind of content. Also, how many people in here have more than one mobile device? So the way in which we interact is going to change pretty dramatically on that front if it hasn't already.
I'm going to toss out one more question here. For the professionals in the audience, how different is strategic public relations on the commercial side from what our guests are talking about? Is it the same thing applied to a different arena, or is it substantially different? I toss this out to our colleagues. So it doesn't make a difference if it's soap? Andy, is it just soap? It could be. I guess they don't make ivory soap anymore, but it could be soap, or it could be Obama.
Soap doesn't call you and yell at you at midnight for running the wrong television ad.
No, but we have these same conversations with some of the biggest CMOs in the country, and they're all trying to figure this out too. So I do think there's a lot of overlap.
We'll take two final questions here, and then we'll call it an evening. Yes, sirs.
Good evening. My name is Alex Laverty. I'm a Master's of Public Diplomacy student here at Annenberg. My question is about risk of using social media. I bring that up because U.S. Embassy Cairo recently sent out a tweet that developed a lot of controversy in the diplomatic scene. And I was struck by when you talked about sort of tweeting back at the invisible chair, and sort of how did you balance the risk, and how do you mitigate that if you do start a controversy?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. Look, the challenge is you have to talk about what people want to talk about, not just talk about yourself all the time. And companies are really good about talking about themselves, but not, and that's why nobody cares, right? And like you think about what press releases we put up, right? The question is how can we be part of the conversation? So there's always this inclination to jump on stuff, and you're right, we need a real good editorial voice. Some of that is just judgment and making sure that there's someone between the person who presses the button and someone can make a decision, and somebody's got to be responsible if they get it wrong. And so there was clearly big discussions, though quickly, and senior people have to make themselves available for those conversations, which is not easy, because it does have to happen very fast. I will also say the good news is digital, for better or worse, is relatively self-regulating. So you will see when you have fights that your supporters will come to your aid, opposition will come to the other side. In the 2008 campaign, the biggest challenge we had was on FISA, which is the information privacy kind of stuff, right? Federal wireless warrant, wireless warrantless wiretapping, things like that. The president came down on the relatively unpopular side from our base's perspective. And we had this community called my.barackobama.com, which is our, sort of pre-Facebook, right? Our communities, our groups, Doctors for Obama, Women for Obama. All of a sudden, the biggest group on our site was, tell President Obama, tell Senator Obama to change his position from our own base. And a lot of people like me got screamed at, right? And it was a really bad couple of days. But to our management's credit, we didn't just shut it down. We let it play out, and it never happened to us again. Because they realized they weren't going to be able to take us off message from it. We responded, we stated our position. We said that we appreciate your comments, we'll read them, but thanks, here's where we are. And people were real upset for a couple days, and they moved on and never happened to us again. So, overreacting to those things also is not always the best route.
Good evening, my name is Eric Deutsch. I'm part of the PRSA LA contingent here tonight. I attended one of these several years ago with Joe Trippi, and he talked about the 2004 election, what a watershed it was with digital, and it was mind-blowing at the time. And this is twice as mind-blowing, if that makes any sense. But the question I have for you is, you talked a lot about social platforms, you talked about email. What about opt-in text messaging? Did that play a role?
You know, smaller than I would have thought. In 2008, we were huge proponents of text messaging. You know, that's how we announced the vice presidential announcement, right? Be the first to know who we picked. The good news about text messaging, right, is that everybody reads them, right? They're still well over 90%, close to 100% open rate on text messages because you're quite protective of it. But you really have to be careful how much you send because they can get annoying. People's tolerance for it is very low because this is personal. It's in my pocket. The challenge is, what can people do from their phones? We find it very effective for managing volunteers, for managing staff in the field, people that are willing to get that information. And obviously the advantage is that you also have location darn accurate, like really, 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 within feet accurate, which is amazing. So those two together for rapid response, like call into a radio show, come to an event, stay in line, those kinds of things, really, really good. But on the whole, it's not going to work for persuasion because I'm not going to give you my phone number unless I already really like you. And two, honestly, because of the way the carriers are set up, it wasn't a big fundraising mechanism for us or anybody. So I don't think, no one's really figured out SMS in a big way. On the other hand, mobile as a web platform is exploding and tremendously huge for us.
Okay, final question. No, I'm going to ask the final question. That's the cool thing about being dean. Who's going to win the LA mayoral election? That's for you. Is Hillary going to run? And if she does, who's she going to run against?
This gentleman had a question.
You got the easier one. You go first.
I have no idea if she's going to run.
James Carville famously said when he was asked about a candidate running for president again in the last election, that running for president is kind of like having sex. You don't just do it once and say, okay, I checked that box. People want to keep doing it. And ultimately, I think if Mrs. Clinton feels up to it, and I have a sense she probably will, I think there's a really good chance that she'll run. She obviously has invested a lot in running in the past, and so I think the chances are probably good. But I can say without any fear of contradiction, it's not something I know anything about firsthand. I can only speculate.
Oh, you've already given you're not going to go on the record on this.
I worked for I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just going to offer a caveat before I answer. As a few of you know, I predicted that Hillary Clinton would be the Democratic nominee for president in 2008. And I was.
So did she.
I was 8 years. So did she. I was 8 years early, but I was wrong. I thought our football team was going to go undefeated and win the national championship last fall. I was 2 years early, but I was wrong. I'm going to give you a Weasley political answer to your question. To me, there's a fundamental question which is going to decide the mayor's race. Wendy Gruhl has to figure out a way to convince voters, particularly Valley voters, but voters more generally, that just because she has received such overwhelming support from labor does not mean that she is beholden to labor. And she took her first step toward trying to do that last week. She gave a speech over at that sleepy little junior college in Westwood. And not incidentally, hey, you're on enemy turf here, deal with it. And not coincidentally, I think last week was the best week of her campaign, primary or general. That's not to say that Eric Garcetti can't control his own fate. But if she figures out a believable answer to that question, her chances of getting elected mayor are probably quadruple. If she doesn't, then I don't think she wins.
Okay, good, thank you. we'll check back in a couple of months and see if
Yeah, you get 3 years.
I want to thank once again first of all, let me thank our panel who really did a fabulous job. Wonderful job. Come back again. I want to thank especially Jerry Swirling, our fearless leader, for doing this work. And in the spirit of the group formerly known as the audience, I want all of you to applaud yourself for coming out tonight and participating. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next year at the Smith Symposium. Okay.